Let's get some reaction. Director of the University of Johannesburg Center for Africa-China Studies, Professor David Monyae, joins us for a conversation. Professor, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. I mean, we've been listening to the different responses in the wake of US President Donald Trump's threats to withdraw aid to South Africa. What do you make of these threats?
I think is quite concerning. I think what is more critical, as much as the South African government has responded in a much more measured, dignified, and diplomatically quite clear, seeking to put all matters on the negotiating table with the Trump administration, it is quite worrying that a number of individuals, parties within South Africa itself, are indeed worsening the situation, showing the international community that the country is not united, and that in itself is going to complicate matters. At the moment, South Africans do not agree on any issue. It strengthened certain elements. We're talking of right-wing elements at the moment, but it also to the more radical elements as well that will react to this to an extent that the US itself and internal moderate forces within South Africa will be unable to control this matter. It's quite dangerous, as a matter of fact.
In fact, the ANC has said that AfriForum's efforts to protect apartheid land-era ownership patterns have found an amplifier through US President Donald Trump. I mean, that in itself, what does it tell us about the possibilities of what could happen here, understanding what Donald Trump is trying to do and how he's trying to consolidate leadership in the US?
I think what we know quite clear is that President Donald Trump, based on his first administration, he had racist views with regards to the African continent, and that is quite clear. However, in his second administration, there are a number of things that we need to take into consideration. Firstly, he has come back into power with a popular vote, and therefore voted by some of our strategic partners within the US, the African American, the diaspora community, and that complicates matters. Even if we say he's racist, African Americans in their big numbers voted for him, and therefore it puts us at a disadvantage. I think what ought to be done is to negotiate with the man and ensure that we protect South Africa and Africa's interests, and ensure that we gain and leave his other views and showcase that we're not going to interfere in the US politics, at the same time draw the line in the sand that United States should not interfere in our domestic affairs.
Yeah. According to your understanding, I mean, what would you say has now resulted in South Africa finding itself in Trump's crosshairs? Would you say it's entirely based on land expropriation, as Trump says? As Trump says, I mean, he says that the leadership is doing terrible things, horrible things in South Africa, which really perhaps shows a little bit of misinformation that is on his end. Or could it also perhaps be a warning shot over South Africa's positions when it comes to issues related to Russia and Palestine? What's to be made of that?
Well, indeed, and there are quite a number of these issues. One is to do with certain lobby group that is angry with South Africa over the question of taking Israel to ICC. I think South Africa hasn't been forgiven for that by these forces. And these are forces that are quite close to President Donald Trump. So that's one version. We also have the Russia that you have mentioned, but the mere fact that South Africa is also a member of BRICS also add fuel to the fire that BRICS and its position on the need to transform the international order that United States dominates, particularly around the question of usage of the US dollar. President Trump, during his campaign, already had given warning shots that he's going to sanction any country or BRICS groupings for choosing to use any other currency other than the US dollar. And therefore, there's so many issues at hand. So it really depends how South Africa handled President Donald Trump. But at the end of the day, given the disparity in terms of power between the United States and South Africa can only win if it works with other countries, particularly within BRICS, and avoid taking issue on its own.
Just going back to some of the reaction that we've had. I mean, we've heard from government around the position in terms of strategy that South Africa wants to handle this matter. But we also listened to Minister Gwede Mantashe's assertion. He spoke about the minerals part of it. If South Africa did indeed decide to withdraw its minerals to the US, is there any substance to that? I mean, what kind of ripple effect could we see if that could be a direction? Of course, we know that it isn't at the moment, but, is there substance to what he has to say?
Minister's views are much more rhetorical. Yes, it's a good idea, but it can only work if South Africa work closely with the rest of the continent. As it stands, South Africa does not beneficiate its own minerals, and the bulk of companies that are operating in South Africa are Western-owned companies, and therefore South African government doesn't have much leverage, even though the country is rich with mineral resources. However, I think there is room to work within SADC with fellow African countries. But as it stands, I do not think that position will stand a chance, given the fact that fellow African countries are so weak and they depend on the Western powers, including on their own budgets, in terms they depend on handouts, donation. Some countries, up to 50-60% of their national budget comes from the Western world, and therefore I do not think the ministers in those countries will have a much bigger voice as our own minister expressed today.
Yeah. Very well. Thank you so much. Thanks for weighing in on this discussion. We leave it there for now. Speaking there to the director of the University of Johannesburg Center for Africa-China Studies, Professor David Monyae, giving us some perspective around the U.S. President Donald Trump's threats to withdraw aid to South Africa. Now,